Hey guys, today I wanted to talk about emotions in relationships. Now, obviously emotions in relationships are pretty much intertwined intrinsically, but I wanted to talk about this idea of triggers and understanding triggers within a relationship because it's one of the most important things to understand within a relationship if you are to make a relationship work. Now, one of the biggest things that people especially I see in my comments, is people who are talking about simply walking away from triggers. Your partner's triggering you, then you just need to get away from them. So in this video, I want to break down why avoiding your triggers in a relationship is actually going to be worse, both for you and your partner. So I can totally understand how, when it comes to relationships, emotions are heightened. Often people say that relationships are a mirror of yourself. And that is very, very true. Any emotion in a relationship, whether it's the positive feelings in a relationship or the negative feelings in the relationship or everything in between, is usually heightened because when you're in a relationship with someone, you're closer to them, you have a connection to them, and everything is acted like a catalyst. So it makes every reaction stronger. The problem is that when it comes to emotions, people can often get it into their head of, oh, I sometimes feel bad in a relationship. It's my partner's comment that triggers it. Therefore, they're not the right partner for me. So I'm just going to walk away from this relationship, or I'm going to walk away from this conversation and avoid that trigger. So the trigger is the micro moment of emotion that we have before we have the full emotion. So a lot of people can get it in their minds that I feel triggered around my partner, therefore I'm going to avoid it. So I want to break down why this is actually worse for you and your partner and what we can do about it within relationships. So I want to start by talking about this illusion of peace. So when it comes to relationships, avoiding a trigger, avoiding the quote unquote negative emotions can feel like this idea of peace. So walking away from a trigger can bring an illusion of peace, but it's not true peace, it's an illusion. In the same way as walking away from a fire doesn't put the fire out, walking away from an emotion doesn't change the emotion, it doesn't do anything about the emotion. The emotion's still there, you're just walking away from it. So there's a lot of myths about triggers. The first biggest myth is that a healthy relationship should be trigger-free. Now, this is one of the things that when you start learning about relationships, a lot of people fall into this idea of, I feel bad, therefore the relationship's unhealthy, therefore I should walk away from this relationship. Truth is, in any relationship, conflict, which I've spoken about before on this channel, and triggers are inevitable. When you are two different people, there will be some sort of conflict, whether it's small on a scale of wanting different meals, as an example, to the bigger things, which is what core memories, core emotions that you've had that are more sensitive than someone else. So trying to figure out a trigger-free relationship means that both partners end up walking on eggshells or suppressing their true selves. So in trying to avoid this trigger, you end up actually creating a more unhealthy relationship for both of you. But the next myth is this idea that if I avoid the trigger, then I'm fixing the problem. And this again is one of the easy habits to fall into. Avoiding a trigger is only ever going to be a temporary management strategy. It's not an actual cure. You're not removing the landmine. You're just trying to remember where you buried it so you don't step on it, if that makes sense. So avoiding a trigger is not actually going to get to the root of the problem. So all you're going to do, again, is end up walking on eggshells, trying to avoid something that is there. So it will never last. The third big myth is that it's my partner's job to never trigger me. And this is one that I see over and over and over again. People saying, well, I told my partner that it's a trigger and they kept on doing it. This idea that it's your partner's job to never trigger you puts all of the responsibility and work onto them rather than taking on the responsibility for the trigger yourself. So the reality is that yes, partners can be mindful and kind about a trigger, but they're not responsible for your internal nervous system. Because if you think about it, if your emotions depend entirely on their perfect behavior, then you don't actually have any agency. This is actually really disempowering to you because it means that you're relying on someone who is not within your control. So you're going to spend your time trying to control them rather than putting the energy onto managing your own triggers, which we'll talk about in a second. And the last big myth is this idea that triggers are proof that we're not compatible. So I've spoken on this channel about this compatibility myth before. I'll link to the video up above and in the description down below. But triggers are kind of echoes of past events. So everyone has some triggers of some sort. And just because certain actions from your partner can raise those to the surface, again, doesn't mean that it's incompatibility. It just means that there's some stuff there that you can work on in order to make life better for you. And again, we'll talk about that in a second. So they're the main sort of myths that I kind of want to debunk off the bat. So avoiding triggers always backfires. When you choose to avoid triggers instead of processing them, you unintentionally create 3 massive problems. So there's this shrinking world effect. So to avoid being triggered, you start cutting out topics of conversation, activities, maybe even physical intimacy. What happens is that you start to create a safe zone that over time becomes smaller and smaller and smaller in your relationship. So it becomes so small that there's no room for actual joy, spontaneity, or connection, because what you're doing is you're shrinking your world in order to avoid triggers. So you start avoiding things that may potentially trigger your emotions. You're telling your partner to stop talking about certain topics, etc. And all this does is this disempowers you, and it ends up putting up a barrier around yourself, which pushes a partner away. But not only that, it also creates this kind of pressure cooker dynamic. So when you're suppressing these triggers, you're suppressing your emotions, they don't disappear. So if you're shrinking your world and you're pushing down these emotions, you're trying to just stop anything from triggering you, those triggers don't disappear. They just go underground. And this builds up an internal pressure. So what happens is that eventually when you do get triggered, which will happen, triggers will happen wherever you go, whether it's through your partner or a new partner or someone at the store, whatever it is. When that happens, even a minor event can cause a massive explosion or a shutdown because it's carrying the weight of months and months of avoided feelings. So this means that everything can build up and then it can come out all at once. You know, when I start early with members, we talk about this. When they talk about how they realize that they've kept all of these feelings in, and then what had happened is their partner had triggered them and they exploded and caused more of a disconnection within the relationship. So it creates a pressure cooker within yourself. Then most of all, avoiding triggers increases your sensitivity. So you actually become more sensitive over time. So it doesn't build resilience, it actually causes you to become more sensitive. The more you avoid a trigger, the more power you end up giving it. It creates this taboo thing in your brain, and this thing in your brain feels like a threat to your survival. This is why when you see celebrities sometimes on TV, the really sensitive ones surround themselves with yes men, people who don't trigger them, and who just say, yes, 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 you're the best. So they end up avoiding all of these triggers, but they become more and more sensitive. So they get a bad review and then they lash out. They say the journalist's a terrible person, etc. They actually become more and more sensitive to criticism and things that trigger them. So your brain actually becomes more hyper-vigilant, and it makes you easier to trigger in the future. So avoiding triggers is really not the way. This is ultimately what I'm trying to say here. But there's an actual value of the trigger. So once you stop seeing triggers as attacks and start seeing them as data, things can start to shift. So triggers usually reveal unfinished business. So a trigger is like a indicator, a neon sign pointing to part of you that still needs work, still needs some processing. So if your partner, something that they say, something that they do, whatever their actions, whatever event it is, maybe makes you feel rejected, makes you feel not good enough, this feeling that you're having is revealing something within yourself that you can work on. So triggers are good. Triggers are indicators for ourselves on blind spots that we have in order to be able to put in work. Not only that, triggers can actually build emotional resilience. So every time you're feeling triggered, being able to develop the skill to stay present and be able to learn how to self-soothe yourself without running away, without avoiding it, you actually end up leveling up your emotional maturity. You end up building a tolerance for that trigger, which means that you're less likely to be triggered, or the trigger will be slightly less in the future. The more that you do this, the more you build up that skill. You're essentially proving to your brain that you are safe even when you feel uncomfortable. So this is really important. But it's also really valuable for you and your partner over the long term as well. Working through a trigger, especially being able to do it with a partner, it helps to build a deeper level of trust than simply saying, I'm fine, or simply walking away from a trigger. Being able to work through it together and building the core elements that we talk about helps to build a system and processes that prove to both of you that the relationship can survive triggers. You end up building tools for both of you to use in the future. So this is especially crucial when it comes to developing a long-term relationship. When you're repairing a relationship, you're trying to get an ex back, as an example. Oftentimes, people just kind of get it in the head of, I just need to get my ex back. Once I get my ex back, everything's going to be okay. What I see a lot is people who have been through like ex back programs, or who have reconciled with a partner, but they still haven't developed the tools to able to bring the relationship and grow the relationship to a really healthy, strong, thriving place in the future. And this is really important. These skills are life skills to build a strong relationship that you both get to benefit from long term. So before I move on to the sort of how, this is what I work on with all of my members, is not just about repairing a relationship, not just about growing a relationship, but about taking a relationship to the next level long term. And this is all about skill building. These are relationship skills. So obviously I can't jump into everything that we talk about in just this YouTube video, but if you do want to dig deeper and join us, then join my relationship bootcamp. This is where you're going to learn the same fundamental steps that all my members start with to start repairing, regrowing, and rebuilding their relationships long term. All you have to do is click on the link in the description to grab your spot. So how do we re-engage with triggers? How do we stop avoiding triggers, and how do we start getting into the habit of re-engaging with triggers? So here's a kind of a beginner's framework for re-engaging with triggers. The very first step is always noticing the internal alert. So this is getting into the habit of recognizing the feeling of the trigger. So recognizing the physical sensation. Does your chest tighten? Do your ears get hot? Do your fists clench? Does your jaw clench? Do you break out into a sweat? Do you get a pounding in your chest? Notice what that initial alert system is. Learning how to notice that trigger is going to be really, really important to build over time. And then label it. Put a label on it. You can give it a name. You can say, this is my insecurity. This is my fear of rejection. This is Tony, the terrible trigger, as an example. Yes, I did make that up on the spot, and yes, I regret it. But giving it a label helps you to put it in a box and be able to recognize it next time. And this is not just me making this up, by the way. This is used in a lot of different types of therapy, counseling, and relationship models. Labeling this emotion, this trigger, helps you to learn to re-engage with it in a much more effective way. The next step is the pause, the tactical pause. So when you feel this trigger, and you can go into what we call fight or flight mode. You may have heard that phrase a little bit, but basically when your body goes into the fear response, your brain can change, essentially. It changes its function because it goes into more of a survival mode. So pausing, learning how to pause, taking a moment to breathe, or going for a walk, being able to recognize it and say to your partner, being able to say, this may seem like I'm trying to avoid the situation right now, but I just realized in the past that I've not been very good at managing my triggers. So right now, I'm just going to take a second to recompose myself because I want to be able to re-engage with this conversation in a better way. Is that okay with you? So just being able to have a response, to be able to pause in order to gather yourself for a second is going to be really, really helpful. But most of all is being able to dig into the root, being able to ask yourself about the story. What is the the story I'm telling myself right now. So this is a much longer video, but when it comes to emotions, we have the trigger, which is the first part of the emotion, and then we have the story that we tell ourselves. That's the meaning that we attach to the trigger. This is different for everyone, but digging into what is the story, what is the script that I am telling myself right now that I'm attaching to this trigger. So for example, let's say your partner has said, I'm worried that we're drifting apart. If you're feeling triggered from that, being able to dig in, doesn't have to be in the moment, but it can be away from the conversation to process it. But being able to ask yourself, what is the story that I'm telling myself about this trigger? So I'm worried that she's ready to leave me. I don't want her to leave me. I'm worried that I'm going to be alone. I'm worried that I'm failing at this relationship. Just being able to recognize what is the story that you're telling yourself in that moment, that you're attaching to that trigger. This is going to be really important to start to learn about what scripts we tell ourselves versus what is actually happening in the moment. And this is important to start to learn to recognize. Then the last thing is, over time, being able to share vulnerably. Now, this doesn't happen instantly. With this framework, this is not something that is done in one go. It's not done in one conversation. But all of these points, being able to develop these skills on how to do all of this, being able to share your feelings in a way where you've processed your emotion, you processed the story that you tell yourself, you processed the trigger, being able to do that in a soft way that doesn't cause any triggering within your partner is going to be really important. Learning how to do that, again, like you said, is a skill. But this is part of conflict, healthy conflict, is being able to share your side of things, your feelings, but doing it in a non-toxic way. And I've mentioned this before on the channel about these toxic responses that we can have in conversations that we don't realize that we're even doing, but are guaranteed to bring out triggers in your partner. Avoiding these is going to be really important. I've actually done a deeper dive video on this, which I'll link to on the screen up above and in the description down below. But learning how to respond in a way that doesn't cause triggering in other people is a skill to develop as well. And that's going to really help these conversations to build connection rather than disconnection. So I won't dig into it here. I'll leave you with that deeper dive video, and I'll see you over there.